All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the host and the founder of the Rise Above Justice Movement and the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. All right. So today I am joined by another candidate that is running for Congress in California, and no stranger to the public eye, and no stranger to just being a badass human being that's now running for Congress to fight for people, not corporations. How do we support the people's agenda? We get people elected that uplift that agenda and fight like hell for the working class. So, with that being said, you know, Nicola, I hope I got that correct. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. What a brilliant introduction. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I do my best. Obviously, this has been a work in progress, like getting all these candidates together. I I feel for the first time in a very long time, I feel a sense of hope. I feel a sense of joy. And that's what politics should feel like. And we'll dive into why it doesn't feel like that and why it hasn't. And then we'll also talk about why I feel that way now. And others are rising up, they're fighting back, they're in the streets, they're protesting, they are fighting back against an authoritarian regime that has destroyed the foundations that our generations have worked to build. Now, have the systems always worked in the way we want to? No, it's obvious. It's very obvious that these systems were not built for people like you and me. It's very, very obvious. Criminal justice, ICE and DHS, which we'll dive into. But first things first, walk us through who you are, walk us through your background, and why you're running and why it's important for progressive candidates. And I know progressive gets thrown around a lot, but what does it mean to actually be truly progressive? Your platform explains that, but walk us through who you are, what your story is, and why you're running at a point in a time like this.
Oh, such a good question. So, my name is Nicolas Carjuzaa. I'm running for Congress in California's 8th congressional district. This district includes the West Contra Costa County, so it's places like Richmond and El Cerrito. It includes all of Solano County, which actually extends now because of the Prop 50, the intentional gerrymandering. It goes out to Davis and it goes out to Lodi. It's a massive district, so we spend a lot of time on the road driving to meet people. And I'm from this area. I grew up in Martinez. I went to Alhambra High School, graduated in 2009, went to Sonoma State University, graduated in 2013, went to Paris, France, got my first master's degree in business management. Went to the United Kingdom, got my second master's degree in international relations at the University of Bristol. Then I moved to New York City afterwards, and I became a financial regulator at a company at an organization called FINRA, which is a federally authorized regulator of the financial industry. And in that space, I was working with foreign governments, I was working with government agencies, and I was trying to do my part to protect American citizens and investors by promoting our markets, safeguarding them for workers, making sure that the financial system would work for people. You can see how in 2024, Trump gets into office, and I realized that role is kind of useless. Not because the mission's bad, not because it's incapable, but because the rules are written in Congress. And frankly, if you're an analyst and you're studying this stuff, it can be pretty frustrating to see how it's all going and then to not be able to do anything about it. I'd thought of running for Congress a long, long time ago. But the issue was I was 25 and I had to build up some cred. So it was about the time when I was living in the UK because it was 2016. And that's when Brexit happened. And what I'll say about that briefly is that Brexit vote shocked everyone in the UK. I went to bed that night and I thought, like, this will be fine. Europe will stay together and no big deal, right? Like, it can't possibly happen. And around this time, Trump was also campaigning, right? So there was a feeling of, Trump made some comments about Muslims, and that if you just replaced the word Muslims with Jews in his comments, they sounded identical to like Nazi quotes. So this was kind of swirling for me. I was abroad in the UK, but I was watching both these debates, and I felt like, my gosh, woke up the next morning and Brexit had passed. So the UK was going to leave the European Union. It's just this moment of disunity, this great cleavage in international relations. And it was all over the migrant issue. It was all over the Syrians who were coming to Europe to be safe, to be free from the violence in their country. And it was just a really profound moment. And when I came back, I was like feeling the debate, and I was like, you know what? This feels exactly like it did in the UK. I can't explain it, but it's almost like people are yelling that the sky is green, and you can't convince them. And it's all about the immigrants, and it's all about the scapegoating, and it was all about Barack Obama, and it was like a lot of racism in the conversation, which you seemingly couldn't talk about because it would offend people. But it just felt like we weren't talking about facts. We weren't talking in reality. And so I was watching and I thought, you know what? Trump is going to win this race. Just the same way that Brexit happened. I'm not going to wake up surprised. And that's true. That happened. So he won in 2016. Around then, I really knew I was going to run for Congress eventually. But did my work. Worked in the private industry. Did my best to make it as a normal person in this world. Saw how labor doesn't really reward anybody, saw how nobody can afford anything, saw that in 10 years of working, I couldn't save up enough money to buy a house anywhere, to raise a family or do any of the things that my parents had. So eventually my wife and I married and we moved back to California. And I was already set on running for Congress and I was already set on doing this. But as it turns out, coming back here, the person I'm running against is an incumbent who's been in power for a long time and not enough has gotten done. In fact, I think there's a lot of complacency in this district. So I look at it and I think, yeah, this is basically the stars aligning. This cannot continue. This person can no longer be our congressman. He's been good in the past. I give that freely, but it's not good enough anymore. Missing hundreds of votes is a problem. It's not representation. And our district needs new ideas and it needs new urgency. And so this was an easy decision to me. It had been a long one coming, but for me, it was like a homecoming, and it's just been brilliant. The experience is amazing. I've spent so much time knocking on doors, 6,000 doors, me personally. With my volunteers, we've knocked on almost 10,000. So we're doing the grassroots work, taking no corporate PAC money. We haven't gotten money from unions either. They support the establishment. That's fine. I'm sure they'll come around when I win. And I'll support them. I mean it. I mean it. That this is how the game gets played, and I will be there for unions when they need me. But and so I think the establishment forces are there in this race, and it doesn't matter because I think it's back to the voters. I think it's back to the voters. I think this race is winnable because I spend my time with the voters, not currying favors with the establishment, not going through the powers that be. And I think that that's how we're going to win.
I think so too. And it's beyond time for change. People are sick and tired of being sick and tired, like quite literally. And I know I'm one of them. I come from a working class background. I come from a union organizer, which was my grandfather. My grandmother was a Native American woman. And I think about that. I think about where we've come as a country, but how much further we need to continue going. And it is obvious that the Democratic leadership and the GOP is not meeting the moment. And it's very blatantly obvious. And a lot of that is because of money in politics, which brings up my next thing. I'm older than Citizens United. In 2010, and I've mentioned this numerous times across this podcast, but I'm going to continue mentioning it and talking about it with every single candidate because it's important, because it's gotten us to where we are now. Thinking about money in politics, what are some of those influences that you see? So obvious, we have APAC, we have J Street, we have all of these. We saw it in the Illinois primary. We collaborated on social media with Kat Abou-Ghazaleh, which ran one of the best campaigns that I've personally ever seen. And I've been in advocacy spaces for the last 16 years. That was one of the best campaigns that I've probably ever seen. I also connected with Dylan Blaha, who also ran against an establishment incumbent. Unfortunately, that wasn't the result that we wanted either, but it just shows that people are running for different reasons. And it's exciting to see. But thinking about Citizens United, what went wrong? So
What went wrong?
there is so much to talk about here. And we know that money is not free speech. That is literally what Citizens United did. It said, hey, money is now, well, to be frank, kind of considered a human being, right? And it's so like insane to me. But what went wrong? How do we fix it? And what are steps that we can take to get there? In your opinion, your platform lays it out, but let's get it in audio. What is Citizens United? And again, what went wrong? How do we fix it? And how do we get there?
Yeah. So this is such a good place to start. I think it's hard to find what went wrong without deep elaboration. But let's just focus on what people can agree on.
Yes.
Corporations are not people.
Yes.
Money is not the same as free speech.
Yes.
That
Period.
Supreme Court ruling made both of those rulings, right? It set those two things down in law as precedent. And that's an egregious mistake. But let's not, assume that they came up with this on the fly out of nowhere in 2010. Like, let's understand that a movement backed this and was preparing this for a long time. There is a very broad and vague term that's used in millions of ways in academia and in our conversations, neoliberalism. And what I want to stress is that this is a byproduct of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, to me, is really just a way for the free market to take priority over politics. That is a simple way to describe it. The political sphere, the ideas of citizenship, the ideas of civic virtue, the ideas of a republic that's responsive to people don't work in neoliberalism because neoliberalism accepts the primacy of the market to solve human problems and human condition. That's why it was a long time coming. And I think this goes back to the 70s and 80s, right? So there were a lot of intellectuals who spent their time in the 70s and 80s trying to find ways to allow corporations and wealthy people to control politics. And the ideologies in the free market movement that they created out of this started to reword things and redefine basic words in our language and our vocabulary. So you'll notice that, like, as a result of this, you'll see that government provides customer service. I just want us to think about things like that, like just to understand how deep this is and how broad it is, that is neoliberalism. So if government provides customer service, it's not hard to finally see the culmination of this turning into corporations are people and money is equal to free speech, because the government isn't really a rich idea in these concepts. So this is a long time coming. It starts with the Heritage Foundation. It starts with the Federalist Society. These are organizations that are activist. They have trained intellectuals. They have trained lawyers for decades to prepare for court cases. They bring specific law concepts to the Supreme Court for consideration. They pick out and they cherry pick different cases that they think can advance this ideological cause. And they've been very successful for the past 50 years. So by the time we get to Citizens United, it might be shocking to most people because it just boggles the senses, because it goes against our basic definitions. And it advanced corporate and moneyed control of our politics, but in the direction that it had been pursuing for many, many years. So that is a way for me to just describe in very general terms what happened, how we got here. It was all on purpose. I just want to stress that it was intentional. It was on purpose, and it started in the highest places in our universities. But it wasn't, these are not liberal ideas. To be clear, like, these are antithetical, I think, to liberal ideas, to concepts of democracy, and they are leading us down the road to fascism. And they do that because it's corporate control of government. And that is part of the definition, that is half the definition of fascism. The fact that we get a populist demagogue as a result of it all is because the government doesn't provide for people. The government doesn't provide for people, and it doesn't make lives affordable. So the public services that we built in the 1930s and the 1940s in response to the Great Depression built the American middle class for the first time in our history. And it's the generosity of a political system that does that, which made so many lives possible. So Citizens United and this group of people who are the wannabe oligarchs, the wannabe authoritarians, the tech giants, these oligarchs are responding to a form of politics that's relatively new, almost 100 years though, in our political history. So everyone just take a minute to just sort of understand that these things that we're experiencing right now, this populist demagoguery, this authoritarianism in Trump, these are symptoms of a disease which sought to undermine government and overturn and repeal the New Deal in the 1930s, 1940s. These are people who reject the concept of the middle class. There needs to be overlords and a hierarchy under them of servants, and that's what they intend to make all of us. So that is the problem here. They are trying to kill the middle class.
And the middle class is not having it. And it gives me great hope to hear you say and respond like how you are, because whenever I sit down and interview candidates, I never know what that response is going to be to one of these questions. And it makes me feel like, okay, how's this going to go? You can only do so much research on a candidate, right? And you can look through social media, you can look at their platform, you can look at this, look at that. By my surprise, luckily, all the candidates that I've talked to and the ones that I'm continuing to, reach out to and, like want to bring on the podcast, luckily they've all been really good conversations. So I feel blessed in that part specifically because I've also watched a lot of political podcasts and listened to them, and they haven't always been like that. Um, Thinking about your current incumbent, when was the last time, that you can kind of like think back to that he held a town hall? When was the last time that he spoke at an event? When was the last time he's been present in your community? Like, has it been the last couple of weeks? Has it been the last couple of months, last couple of years? Because he's missed over hundreds of votes over the last several years. Like you said, he's been in Congress for quite a while, and he's missed hundreds of votes. I was looking at his voting record. There's a lot of them that he was absent. Like you literally have missed these votes, or you didn't vote at all. Like you might have been physically there, but you didn't vote at all. That's not democracy, and that's not representative of the people. But when was the last time he held like an event or town hall, or like even was present in the community? And if you have to
Yeah.
Google this, it's been that long.
I mean, okay. So I would just yeah, this is a big problem. He he's not nearly as present as his colleagues are in their own districts. Like I live in Martinez, and half of Martinez was his district, and the other half was Marc Desaulniers. And when our refinery had an explosion, which by the way, all five refineries in the Bay Area were in his district. When our refinery had an explosion, there was this dust that flew up and it landed on people's homes in the downtown area. I mean, tons of dust. It just coated everyone's cars, their backyards, their homes. No one knew what this dust was. Like, what is the chemical that's falling on our gardens, on our children's bikes? Like, what's going on here? It was Marc Desaulniers who showed up, another congressman with no refineries in his district at all. And it's the type of thing where you really notice the difference when you're campaigning because when you're knocking on doors because these boundaries have shifted a couple times. And I knock on doors that, used to have Marc Desaulniers as their congressperson. And these people are always saying to me, like, I really liked Mark Desaulniers because he would have town halls and he would show up, right? And he showed up in my town when there was an explosion at our refinery. So these things would happen, no Garamendi in sight, not for years, years and years and years. So I meet people and they're just like, is he our congressman? I don't know. And I swear, call me a walking, talking pole because I've knocked on so many doors in this district. But people don't know that he's their congressperson because he doesn't show up. He's just never around. The last time he held a town hall, he has virtual town halls once every other month, basically. He doesn't do any of them in person. The last time I saw him in person was at one of those No Kings protests. But it's interesting that he came to that one because I think he knows that I'm campaigning in that area. And I think he knows he has to be there. So for the first time, he's showing up somewhere where I'm campaigning against him, where he's finally being challenged. He has never been challenged in this election for his seat. So I think it shows that this is having the intended effect. If people want their congressperson to show up and be present, and I think it's demonstrative. He won't show up unless he is challenged, and that's a problem with this system. The complacency that's just baked in. He doesn't feel like he has to show up because no one's going to challenge him. It'd be like running against Nancy Pelosi here, you know? Like people just don't. The difference is he's not nearly as well respected as Pelosi is. So he doesn't really get any excuses. And people don't like it. And they're fed up with the establishment. And they're fed up with not seeing their congressperson anywhere. And I'm sorry, but having a town hall remotely once every other month, it's really, really not representation that we deserve, that people expect of their congressperson. And secondly, to be missing more votes in Washington, D.C. just begs the question, like, what are you doing? Why aren't you passing the torch? Like, why haven't you raised up the number of people that I talk to who are in the know? They're political party members. They are deeply involved with the party. The number of them who will come out and just say to me, we've been asking him for years, like who he's training. Who is he building up to be his successor? I will just say that the premise of that question is also wrong because it's like, why are we asking him to just pass the torch to the person? Like this is not an anointment. We do not live in an aristocracy. And I just don't respect that. So the premise of the question is a little frustrating. But then even if you're living in that aristocracy and that's how you feel, yeah, it's pretty upsetting that he hasn't picked a successor. He's not even doing the job. So it's offensive to everyone. Like even the establishment here are like, what the hell? It is
Well,
very frustrating. People do speak like this, and so it's most people who speak like this. He's a weaker candidate than he seems because he does have some name recognition in California. He was our lieutenant governor many years back. He was insurance commissioner many years back. He's been in politics for 52 years, but for the past decade, he hasn't really done the job of being present. And I'll say, Mark Desaulniers, the district over, again, this is another congressperson who is 74 years old, not 81 like Garamendi, but 74, has yard signs everywhere. He is putting his name out everywhere. There's not a person in this district who doesn't know their congressperson. There's no challenge to Mark Desaulniers. He doesn't have to do it, but he's doing it anyways because it's like this is the process and this is what people expect. So I think that there's an attitude problem. I suspect there's a little bit of a don't challenge me. I'm the boss, and that's a little bit of how this has gone for too long. I think he's a very competitive person. I've met him in person many times. I can feel the competition oozing from him. He is a ruthless competitor, and I like that about him. We want competitive people in office. That's a good quality to have. Um, but it's a little bit overstaying its welcome. I'll put it that way.
100%. We see it in Florida with Jared Moskowitz, which Oliver Larkin is running a very, very incredible campaign. And I also see it in yours. I see it in Missouri with Hartzell Gray, Jordan Herrera, which are running in the same, running against
Yeah.
Mark Alford. Mark Alford used to be on Fox 4, our local Fox affiliate. I cannot stand the ground he walks on. Um, Unfortunately, I've met him in person. I cannot stand him. And as a somebody who grew up in Missouri, I I know firsthand what gerrymandering looks like. I know firsthand what money in politics looks like.
Yeah.
There's also Ann Wagner, who's the current GOP incumbent in
Yeah.
Missouri. We saw what happened with Cori Bush. The pro-Israel lobby funneled millions of dollars into Wesley Bell's campaign and you know, knocked a nurse out of Congress. Okay, Cori Bush was on the ground during the protest of the murder of Michael Brown. Right, like seeing that advocacy work on the ground, that is what we call the people power and call grassroots. Speaking of which, on your platform, you talk about citizens or citizen assemblies. As somebody who has attended a couple of these, I love this. It gives a power to the citizens. It gives a power to the constituents. It gives the power and the organizing power and the grassroots. Can you talk about what citizen assemblies look like and like what are they and why are they important and critical for democracy? You would think it would be
Mm,
common sense, but
It's not. It's what makes it common sense? Common sense is just something that everybody knows. There's nothing there's I mean it's not what I'm trying to say is our democratic culture could be stronger.
mhm,
And this is something citizens assemblies would do.
mhm.
So in a democracy, we believe in bottom-up power. We do not believe in being ruled. We believe in being represented. So now, what do we do about that as people, right? How do we keep power to ourselves? How do we have bottom-up power? We do that by self-organizing. And we do that with citizens assemblies. So imagine we do have a representative form of government. We live in a republic. Very important to have that, I think. I greatly respect the foundations of our Constitution and the way that we've done this. But one thing we can do is have citizens' assemblies, which are self government in a way without the rule of law. What we do is we organize people, just common citizens, to solve our problems, our political problems. And so what we do is we organize a little into rooms. We gather a solid representation of the district that we want, of the people that we have. And we get together and we talk about some of the political issues that we face as a people. And collectively, we add all the resources and expertise and range of experience and diversity of opinion to a seemingly broad question and we enrich it. And then we find an answer. And then we find solutions. We find consensus. And as we do that process, we learn to love each other. We learn that we can respect each other despite differences. We learn from each other in the handoff of experience and diversity of perspective. And we walk away from these things feeling more united, more like we have everything in common, and more like this is doable. Democracy is doable. It can work. We have that lived experience. We walk away feeling stronger connected to each other, and we feel better educated. And now our representatives can use this consensus that we build as people to then go fight for us based on what we, the people, have stated is important and what is our consensus. That lends strength to our representation. That lends strength to our democracy. It lends strength to our leaders to then go and represent us, not to rule us. Because again, we're giving them our opinion and we're giving them the ammo they need to go fight for us. So we do this in our district. By the way, this is done in Europe. This is done across Italy, across France, and in Germany. We do it here in California. We do it in Berkeley. It's been done on occasion, could be more. But they need to be organized very carefully. These are sensitive topics. People need to feel safe. They need to have experience doing them. And the conversations need to be facilitated. But guess what? We also do it every day with a judge and a jury. And so I think that's the best way to describe how this could be possible, but it needs to be done very carefully. It needs to be organized and structured. Conversations need to be facilitated. There need to be moderators. But this is how it can work. And then we can have a democracy that's bottom up.
Mhm. Exactly. 100%. Which, speaking of, things that are kind of like impacting, like communities across the country are facing an affordability crisis. And thinking about this, we see the AI data centers that continue to pop up, and there's a lot of concerns around those, the power grid, the water supply, and they build these, they have staff that are there that build them, and then essentially those staff are laid off, and then they kind of like essentially like run themselves. And they're not putting these in like downtown Kansas City. They're putting these in or like downtown Los Angeles. They might be, who knows? But because anything can happen. But they're putting these in communities that are already hit by, like a lack of housing. A lot of these communities have food deserts. They're hitting like these rural areas that do not have the resources like we do in like these big cities, right? And
Well,
even then,
because the zoning rules are flexible for them and because the land is cheap
exactly,
and the community isn't organized to respond to them.
exactly. And I'm thinking of Texas, which is not a part of the national power grid. And
Oh yeah.
they saw what happened, Cancun Cruz decided to like literally abandon his constituents while they're freezing. That's not who they need to represent them at all. So thinking about affordability, how do we begin to address affordability? Because this also goes into housing, which I want to do a separate aspect on housing because there's a specific thing that I want to talk about. But how do we address affordability and how do we begin to tackle this? How, obviously there needs to be like localized like rent control. There needs to be, I like what Zohran Mamdani is doing in New York City. I feel a lot of energy that comes from him. And that campaign was a winning campaign. And, went up against Andrew Cuomo. We sat down and interviewed Lindsey Boylan, who was the whistleblower that came out against Andrew Cuomo for sexual harassment. She used to work as an aide for him whenever he was governor of New York.
Good job.
But I think we need to see more of that. We also saw it in Seattle. A Democratic Socialist became mayor of Seattle. Democratic Socialist won in Atlanta, Georgia for the city council. It's obvious that people are fed up with the establishment. But how do we address this affordability issue? And what does it look like in your community? What are some of those concerns that you're hearing from people?
Okay, so the answer, let me break this down a little bit. And I want to add one more thing to what you had said earlier about these data centers. The problem of shadow banking of finance. So the two things I'm going to break this down on terms of affordability, it is money and it is public policy. That's it. Everything can be solved through these two things in terms of affordability. So, do we know what shadow banking is? Do you know what that is? Have you heard of it?
I have not.
Shadow banking is private lending.
Okay.
So we have a banking system which is highly regulated. There is great oversight into what banks do, how they lend money, who they lend money to, the terms and conditions which they can use, the amount of risk that they can take. Now, that limits the amount of money that banks can provide to people who need capital to make risky investments. So where do they get it from? They get it from private lenders. They look like hedge funds, private banks, private equity, very rich individuals, high net worth people. The amount of money that has gone into shadow banking, that's why they call it shadow banking, because it's unregulated banking. There is no oversight into how much money private equity channels into investments. And so all of these people with all this money, and all these institutions with all this money are credit providers, and they are lending all of this money to these out of control projects like data centers. And they don't care about the risk because what they can see is greed and returns on income, on investment. So, why are things unaffordable? It might have to do with the fact that investments don't follow what people need. They are only being made at greater and greater scale for people who want to make more money. And that is why the scope of AI and the scope of data centers and the scope of all these projects seems so out of touch, seems so out of control, seems so risky. Why do we keep talking about this AI bubble? It's because private equity has gotten out of hand. And they're lending all this money at great risk with no oversight and no accountability. And they're expecting bailouts. They're expecting to be bailed out for making all these risky investments. Now, what could have stopped this? Higher taxes, wealth taxes, period. If these people didn't have so much glut and so much greed, that money could have been spent on people in a public capacity. We could have funded schools. We could have funded free lunches for kids. We could have given people childcare, tax credits. We could have made education affordable. We could have made healthcare a single payer system. We could have provided for people. We could have created public systems that benefited working people so that the labor you put into the system rewards you effectively. Instead, what we have are schemes within the financial system where corporations and stockholders expect stock buybacks to raise the value of their stocks. They can sell stocks at a lower capital gains rate than you pay in your taxes. So they don't get paid in salaries. And if you're getting paid hourly in a salary, you're being taken advantage of by the tax code, by our tax system. And all that extra money is just going into these random kooky bad investment scenarios. There's going to be a financial crash because of this. Probably. I don't know when. But everyone expects it, anticipates it because there's no return. Everyone knows that this is completely crazy. The stock market is completely debased. There is no productivity matching what the stock market is worth right now. So when we talk about affordability, it is inherently a public policy failure, and it is inherently a problem of our tax policy and the way that we money works. So I think most people, if they could earn $1,000 more a month, would feel life-changing, right? Imagine $1,000 more a month. It would be incredible, right? I mean, it would really be a game-changing feeling for most people. I know because I would feel it. And what I want to say is the problem of affordability in this country goes down to that inequality, and it goes down to how money is channeled and who it works for. And because of shadow banking, because there's no regulation, no assertive regulation into private equity, because that's where all the money is gone. The entire system is built on a house of cards to collapse again. Just like very similar to the way it did in 1929, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have affordability if the government taxed wealth, and if that government put that wealth back into the hands of consumers, into citizens' hands to take care of themselves, to provide for their families. Markets would work better. Businesses would operate better because they'd have better employees, better talent training, they'd have better pools of people to draw upon. Communities would be stronger. Affordability isn't just like, oh, there's inflation because of gas prices. That's a serious issue, but that's like a microcosm of what's really going on here.
Mm-hmm.
The financial system isn't built for working people. It is built for investors.
Mm-hmm. And it's obvious. And it gets more obvious every single day. The longer that it goes on that we don't begin to address these, the longer it takes to address it, the less time, or the longer, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this, because it's like we're not addressing it, it's going to continue going on. And the longer it goes on, the more that we say fuck you to the middle class and to the working class.
Well, this is how the middle class is being
Like,
squeezed, right? The financial system
yeah.
isn't built to support the middle class, right? Because it's based on the middle class is based on wage labor.
Mhm.
That's how the middle class was built. It was basically an economy that works for working people, right? If you are working, you're getting paid an adequate amount of money to thrive in an economy. That is the definition of having a middle class. High wages. We resist that every time we don't want to raise the minimum wage. And we resist it every time we force the middle class to subsidize everything. The middle class pays a disproportionate amount of taxes to pay for the needy, to pay for roads, to pay for everything, right? And then every time that richest class of Americans lose control, lose their wealth, get shut out of the system, or there's a collapse, then we take out debt to bail them out. Once again, foisting that burden on the middle class. So the middle class is getting squeezed by a financial system that isn't pro working people. If anybody asks, why isn't the Democratic Party pro working class? You can say, yeah, they defend unions. They're out there fighting for Medicare and Medicaid. They're out there fighting for a single payer healthcare system. They want, all the things that Democrats want, or all the ways that they fight in Congress against Republicans that are basically trying to destroy any semblance of a middle class. That's fine and good. You're defending the middle class, but you're not fighting for the middle class. If you were, you would take on the financial system. The Democratic Party could go much further. It could be more pro working class. So it's great to fight for unions. What I'm saying is we do the bare minimum to defend the middle class on some basic issues. And then we try to advance a couple things too for them. But the last time the Democrats had all three branches of government wasn't that long ago. The first half of Biden's first term. And we got nothing done. We invested in corporations. We invested in advanced manufacturing, in semiconductors. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Very important, but that money is trickle down money. That money went to corporations again. It went to the financial system again.
Mhm.
So if you're not putting money directly into people's pockets, who was the last person that did that? Trump. He wrote us checks. He put his signature on the checks. The last time money went straight into people's checks into their bank accounts, that was Biden. That was no, that was not Biden. That was Trump.
Mhm.
I think we've got to be more bold in asserting ourselves against this financial system. And I get it's hard. It's conceptually difficult to explain these shadow banking. Who heard of subprime loans before 2008? What is a subprime loan? It's hard to communicate. You have to explain. You explain, you're losing. All you got to do is just say, investors are taking advantage of working people. That's it. The financial system's broken, doesn't work for working people. And the Democratic Party needs to be the party of anti-corruption. It needs to be the party that's willing to take on finance, take on money, because this is what everyone wants. Even the MAGA supporters. They voted for a guy who they thought can't be corrupted because he's a billionaire. This is the same argument that Tom Steyer is making in California. I can't be corrupted because I'm a billionaire. I don't need their money. Now, I don't know how convincing of an argument that is, but the Democratic Party has to be the party of, we're going to take on the financial system. We're going to provide for working people. We're going to make sure working people get their fair share, first and foremost. And we're anti-corruption. And I think that is how we win. And that is how we stop this cycle of a pendulum constantly swinging back and forth between two parties that look the same to everybody. Of course they do. Bill Clinton repealed Glass-Steagall, by the way. So that crisis fell on Bush Jr., sure. But that crisis was a thing that Bill Clinton did for the financial industry, which harmed working class people. And then Obama couldn't make anybody accountable because no one broke the law. And Democrats wrote it. I swear, I think we've got to look at ourselves a little bit harder, a little bit more critically, and just ask ourselves, are we doing enough for working class people? What it means to be progressive, I know you asked that earlier, but it means you're pro working class. It means you're pro people. It means you believe in progressive taxation. all the things that come with that. The unity that we feel for social causes. The things like Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ plus, this whole agenda of freedom is perfectly aligned and goes and syncs well with a agenda that is pro working people because it's everybody. And we need the social cohesion to do it. We need the class consciousness. We need the awareness for other people's needs. It takes empathy. So this is why progressives are doing so well right now, is because they're the best at speaking to people.
Mhm.
And it starts with exactly their point of view on being pro working people. It starts there, and it starts in basics of humanity, universal rights, and great treatment of others, the golden rule. It's all internally consistent. And so I think that that's why there's reason for hope. And I think it's just it's how we get back to solving so many problems with affordability and with a society that treats everyone, no matter who they are, with justice and with equality.
Speaking of justice and equality, this pivots me to my last thing that I've been holding on to that I wanted to talk to you about. Do you remember the story of Jordan Neely out of New York City? This would have been back in May of 2023. We're coming up on the anniversary of this. Do you remember hearing about this story? It was in the
Say it
New York,
again.
Jordan Neely. It was in New York City on the New York City subway.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Do you remember this story?
I remember that. Yep.
So, for context, and for those of you who are listening, this story is deeply horrific, and I'll give it viewer discretion as advised due to the nature of the topics that I'll be discussing from here until the end of this episode. But on May 1st of 2023 in New York City, Jordan Neely was a 30-year-old black unhoused man, and he was killed after being put in a chokehold by a 24-year-old white United States Marine Corps veteran while riding the New York City subway. Um, the person that killed Jordan Neely is, like I said, a 24-year-old white United States Marine Corps veteran by the name of Daniel Penny. Um, Jordan boarded the car that Daniel was riding in and began threatening passengers. I can't even begin to tell you how horrific this was to like sit back and watch because we hear everything on social media, we see everything on social media. Everybody has a phone, everybody's recording, everybody's you know just looking at everything that's going on. I mean, we see it with like ICE in our communities. But 2 days later, the medical examiner's office ruled that Neely's death was a homicide by compression of the neck. We saw the same thing with George Floyd. We saw this, even though they tried to say it was, he had fentanyl in his system and he had this and he had that. Somebody's past does not determine how they die, okay, or how they're. It just doesn't. I was in Minnesota, and I'm gonna go back to Jordan Neely here in just a second. But I was in Minnesota the day that the verdict came down that they were not going to indict the officer that shot and killed Philando Castile in his own vehicle outside of the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. I was there. That was the first time I ever attended the Black Lives Matter protest, and I can tell you this: I have never felt so validated as being a part of a movement. As a white ally, whenever I tell you, I felt more safe being around people from all backgrounds, from all walks of life, from all like sexual orientations, gender identities. There was drag queens that joined us, which I was like, holy shit, this is exciting, first of all. But it was just really good to just see like the community come together and respond, just like they are now, after the murders, the literal blatant murders that were caught on video of Renee Good, of Alex Preddy, and then also hearing the story of Keith Porter that was in his own backyard. and was killed by an alleged off-duty ICE agent. I just we're not free until we're all free. This goes the same in Palestine with what's happening with the genocide in Gaza, that the United States is complicit in arming and funding. And this is a bipartisan. They continue to send massive amounts of weapons, massive amounts of God. There's so much to unpack here. And I know we don't have like all the time to kind of like dive into it, but systems of oppression work in tandem and they work side by side. And ICE, DHS, police departments, it's all a part of the same system, just different aspects. And it's still the systemic failures that these systems continue to perpetuate violence against marginalized communities. These are the systems working exactly how they were designed. Some systems are beyond repair. The conversation going on right now about funding ICE, you know, or not funding ICE, and funding ICE, there's like this constant battle going on with Congress. But all that to say, it's all a part of the same system and it's by design. And it's another way of saying fuck you to the working class. See a common denominator here because it all comes down and it all trickles down. Gee, it's like trickle down economics doesn't fucking work, right? That's very obvious. I mean, by now people are used to my rambling on this podcast, but I brought this up because there is an organization nationally that is called the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, and they promote a program that is called Housing Not Handcuffs. And what Housing Not Handcuffs is a national campaign to end the criminalization of homelessness and advocate for housing as a human right created by the National Homelessness Law Center and National Coalition for the Homeless. They reject the homeless detention camps. We have seen it numerous times with how many times they have went through and done these mass evictions. They did it in the national forest. And this was at the beginning of Trump's second term, is when it got really, really rough. Do you remember I believe it was a Supreme Court case that came down, and there's so much to unpack, and I don't have enough time to go into how big of a complex issue this is as somebody who has lived in poverty, somebody who has had my housing take away from me by my alcoholic stepfather. And I'm not afraid to share it. I got permission from my mom to talk about it. But we ended up getting kicked out of our home that we were supposed to be buying from him. And we lived in a hotel for over a year and a half because the rent is too damn high. And you have to have a credit, you have to have, three times the income. Whenever you're living somewhere and you're literally kicked out of it at the last second, what the fuck are you supposed to do? And it's a reality that a lot of us are still facing. Luckily, I have stable housing now. We're getting my mom into stable housing, but it's been an absolute struggle. And this is the struggle that has been going on for generations. My ancestors struggled. My grandfather struggled. My grandfather was a union organizer. All that to say, what are like housing concerns in your area and what do you would propose to address them? This is my last question to you. And let's talk about some housing stuff. I just read about Housing Not Handcuffs. This is a great program and it needs to be amplified even further. But what do you propose?
I just want to start by saying there were a lot of amazing things that you just touched on that I wish I could also take the time with you to break down because I was living in New York at the time. So, one of the things I do want to talk about New York City, by the way, if anybody's lived there, you're extremely desensitized to public
Mhm,
outbursts
mhm,
by people who are struggling.
mhm,
Uh, there are a couple of videos on YouTube you can watch people like screaming, and you can tell who's not a New Yorker because they look like it's like a prank thing to like see like New Yorkers just don't pay attention to people screaming or like things happening around them. They just don't tune in and don't care. And it's a long history of there not being enough social services in New York City to protect people who are in need, who can't work for themselves, who aren't able to retain jobs or stable housing. And all of it is interconnected. But what I will say is that what happened that day in the New York subway is something that happens every day on the New York subway, and no one has to die for it. In fact, in most 99.99%, no one dies. It was one individual who murdered another when every day everyday New Yorkers choose not to kill each other. So I just want to make it very clear that I will speak candidly for anyone who's been a New Yorker. There was nothing special about that incident that deserved somebody to die. And you can see most people in the train are just trying to get to the next stop because it's happened to me, to everyone there. Everyone has been on the train when somebody starts acting up, and we just understand it's mental instability. That's it. Now, what I would do, what does housing look like here? It looks the same across the state of California. We have a deep uh, uh, housing gap. And we hear a lot about homelessness in places like Oakland and Vallejo, two cities in the Bay Area where we hear a lot about the homelessness. We hear a lot about tent cities. We hear a lot about cardboard cities. And the only way to fix this is to provide housing and adequate social services. But first and foremost, people need to be off the streets. They need to have a door they can lock. They need to have dignity, and they need to have the services that can make them functioning, that can make them participate meaningfully in their lives. They deserve that because they're human beings. And it is the state of housing. Now, what I would do is build $1 trillion worth of housing development across this country to close the gap, because that's what's needed. The gap is $1 trillion in housing development that hasn't taken place sufficiently for the past 30 years. I talked a lot about the financial system before this. This is a market failure. It's first and foremost a public policy failure, because when the government knows the market cannot provide for people, the government must step in to help, to do something. It is the place of last resort every time. Every time the market fails, people need help. They turn to government for help, for their needs. And that's why government exists. That's why we self-organize. That's why we have a democracy. Now, like I said, I would build $1 trillion in housing. I would reform the financial system to make sure that housing gets built exactly where it's needed, and that housing needs to be affordable, and that housing needs to be next to transportation. It needs to be accessible so that people who are handicapped, people who are disabled, people who need to be able to leave their apartment and quickly make it to a grocery store or for healthcare. So that housing is needed to be dense. It needs to be affordable. It needs to be the basis of our communities and our cities. And I think that that's how we get people off the streets, and that's how we get people care that they need. And I think it's how we build our cities for the future, and I think it's what we all deserve. So we can't just keep building single family homes sprawled out forever into open land forever and ever and ever. We've got to rethink how we design our cities, how we build our cities, and that those cities need to accommodate for people with needs. Doesn't matter who you are, your housing should be a right. I think it's hard. There isn't a society on the planet that I'm aware of that has solved homelessness, but others do it better than we do. And I think that we can't be in a race to the bottom for this. And this is the richest place on earth. So if anybody should be able to do it, it would be us. I think it's a lack of heart. I think it's a lack of conscience. I think it's a lack of solidarity with our fellow American citizens. I think it's a lack of patriotism, frankly. When you love your country as much as we say we do, then we need to look out not to see if you have. Think about a dinner table. You never, as a host, you never look at someone else's plate like it's your food and that you didn't get enough. You always look at someone else's plate to see if they've had enough to eat. How is our society any different than that? So when it comes to this issue of homelessness and social justice and everything else, we're fully capable. We're fully capable. The money's there, the space is there, the solutions are there. It takes political commitment. And we need politicians who are going to do it.
And not just say that they're going to do it. We
Not
need
just say that they're going to do
politicians to
it.
actually get in there and actually do it.
We
Yes.
have to have politicians who are willing to stand up and say, I am not in this for myself. Damn it. I'm in this to solve this problem. I just think that there are enough young people who are idealistic, who are frankly tired of the system not working for people, tired of people older than us, generations above us, who think that these ideals are fiscally irresponsible. And I think that that's why we see so much hope in this election, because millennials are just stepping in. And we're not waiting our turn. We're going to skip generations if we have to, because we can. It's within our rights. And we don't believe in living in a country like this.
No.
They raised us better, didn't they?
Mhm.
So we're going to build the country the way that they taught us to.
Mhm.
And that includes addressing homelessness in a meaningful way.
Exactly. In a humane way.
Yes.
And because clearly anybody that, God, we can continue going on this because this is my strong suit is like the housing. And, I believe in the power of housing unions and like tenant unions. Like we see here in Kansas City with the KC tenants, the Kansas City
Yeah.
tenants,
Yeah.
they are doing some very impactful work. And, addressing the concerns of the tenants across the city, and they're winning. They're winning against these big corporations that come in and try to buy up these, like you said, the single family homes, and then they do them as like short term rentals. That contributes to the ongoing issue. Like obviously, yes, we still need to have short term rentals. I understand that, but whenever it comes to addressing the actual root issue here, a lot of it is affordability, and it comes down to we need to. I love how you said we need to continue expanding and not just like here and there. It needs to actually be, yes, it needs to be representative of the people, and I think that's what it all comes down to.
Yeah.
But again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I want to say thank you for this
Yeah.
conversation. This has been a very good one that was easily flowing. And how can people contribute to the work that you are doing? How can they contribute to your campaign and follow you on social media? Again, as with any of the candidates that I'm interviewing, it's all going to be in the description of this episode anyway. But just for the audio, how can people contribute to your campaign and help with the work that you are
All
doing?
right, guys. I'm going to do the thing. I'm going to ask for donations. We need it. It's grassroots. We do not have money to run super powerful, supercharged campaigns. None of us do. We are working our hardest, but money is how we have to communicate, right? It costs money to send text messages. It costs money to send out emails. It costs money to help volunteers get out there and knock on doors. I believe in the inspiring work we're all doing. And I believe it because the volunteers are out there doing it, but they need help. These candidates need help. This movement needs help. So you can go to my website. The donation button pops right up. Please do your diligence. Donate to candidates that you think have a good shot at winning. I think we do. I think we can make change in this district. I think this amounts to change across the country. Put your money where your mouth is. Even if it's $5, totally great. Trust me. I will take every $5 donation over a donation from PAX, a max contribution. I don't want it. So we need money. Secondly, Word of mouth. I saved the best for last. Word of mouth. Tell everyone you know that people are running. Go to my Instagram, go to my TikTok, share the videos, help them pop off, help them go viral. Tell everyone you know that Nicolas Carjuzaa is one more candidate running. It helps so much. Get out the word. If we do those things, then we really do have a movement that is strong, powerful, and I can proudly say, not taking any corporate PAC money, I can win this election by basing it in people's needs. That is a powerful message that we send to Washington, D.C. in November. So please, please, please do everything you can, make the contributions, and take the time to share our posts, spread the word.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I greatly appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing whatever this result may be. I know it's not the end of you. I know it, we're going to continue seeing you. We're going to continue watching, but let's do a little bit of positivity. You got this. You
Oh,
definitely
we
got
do.
this. I feel it. I absolutely feel it.
I'll tell you, we have a special thing here in California with open primaries.
Yes.
That means it can be two
Yes.
Democrats in November.
Yes.
So, by contributing to my campaign, we're beating the Republican out of this race. And then we're having a race between two Democrats. And that conversation is a good one. It's a conversation about what it means to be a Democrat, what Democrats can do differently. You've got an 81-year-old who's missing hundreds of votes and a 35-year-old you just heard speak for the past hour. So, let's do it.
Absolutely. All right.
All
Thank
right.
you so
Thanks,
much.
guys.
I greatly appreciate you. Thank you
Yep. Have a good one.
as well.